Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. And as I said before, that when we come to these halachic areas, and here we are in the halachic area of Genesis, that Torah T'mimah goes into, major excursus on these particulars, because the Gemara, the rabbinic material, there's so much of it, and understanding that the idea is to try to perfect the ability to perform mitzvot, that mitzvot are so much more than just good deeds, and to have that consciousness and to recognize that the mitzvot are the essential connection we have to the divine. And that when we use the term Elohim, and this has taken me many years to sort of puzzle out, but the term Elohim defines that relationship in the sense that if God is your Elohim, it means you perform mitzvot. And to the extent that you perform mitzvot, God is your Elohim. So when we say Adonai Eloheinu in the Shema, we're saying that Adonai, this, divine creator, the ultimate cause of the universe, etc., has that relationship with us, that we relate to that creator through the performance of the mitzvot, and how profound that really is. And saying to Jacob, we have the same relationship. And there's, of course, so much more that can be said, because even that concept itself can be misunderstood and not taken in a grander context, that we have to somehow, between heaven and earth, on the one hand, if mitzvot represent our relationship to heaven, we still have to get along with people, and we still have to be able to relate to people. And I believe that's the meaning of that statement, Yafeh Torah im derech eretz. Derech eretz means common human decency, decent behavior, because people can use mitzvot as a stick and to judge others and things like that, instead of seeing it as a way to perfect ourselves, to give us a purpose in life, a reason to get up in the morning, and to have this wonderful connection to our Creator. It is so, and that's the reason why we're doing what we're doing. And underneath all of this, please excuse me, that there's a joy that comes from analyzing these mitzvot in the way we do, and looking and seeing what are the practical applications of them. Excuse me. So we were in the middle of a Torah T'mimah, and he was commenting on the issue of whether a woman, Jewish woman, can perform circumcision, right? Can perform a Brit Mila, a legitimate Brit Milah. And perhaps surprisingly, perhaps unsurprisingly, the Shulchan Aruch says that it's fine. It's appropriate. A woman can do it. And I'm trying to find where we got on this. I mean, it says, right? Ishak Sheira Limo, right? And I wanted to find the place, because this is what we're going to look at it. Oh, Yoreh Deah, that's the Shulchan Aruch, right? Right there. Okay, here we go. Ha'isha Kshera Limo. And here's what it goes on to say in the Shulchan Aruch. And this is kind of what we're kind of looking into more deeply, right? V'im yesh Yisrael gadol. However, if there is an adult Jew, shiodea limol, who knows, who's skilled at practicing circumcision, who couldn't, we would give preference to him. Okay. And this is really what we're looking at too. So there is the glosses of Moshe Isserles, the RaMaH, within the Shulchan Aruch, who, just to repeat, but to clarify, it is what makes the Shulchan Aruch the guide for Ashkenazic practice. The Shulchan Aruch was written by Joseph Caro. He was a Sephardi. Interesting, right? And here you have the RaMaH and RaMaH's glosses, which bring it into a line with Ashkenazic practice. V'zeh leshono, right? And here's the thing. He says, V'yesh omrim, there are those who say, to isha lo timol, that there is an opinion that says that a woman should not practice circumcision. V'chein nohagin, right? So, and he says that's actually the Ashkenazic practice, right? Lahader achar ish, to give preference to a man, to not just give preference, but it means, to go to the trouble to make sure that you have a man. And that's what he says, right? And then this is Torah T'mimah's now comment, and he says that there are other major halachic authorities, the Shach, Siftei Kohen, and the Gra, that's Elijah of Vilna, the Vilna Gaon, right? Tamhu al dvarav. They raise a surprise, an objection to his words. The Hagam Sfara Rishona Modila. He says, what's he saying? After all, the Shulchan Aruch itself says that if there's an adult male, he precedes the woman, right? What's he adding? What's the RaMaH adding? Okay, so this is right. So we went through all this, right? Okay, let me see. So his first attempt to answer that objection, or Torah T'mimah's answer the objection, is to say that what the RaMaH is saying, because the way it simply says if there's an adult male present, then he is so if he's present, right? And he says the point of the RaMaH is that if there isn't a male adult Jew present who knows how to circumcise, lefanenu mizuman, right? So that is not the opinion. That is a difference between the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch and what the RaMaH is saying. Because the Shulchan Aruch says if there isn't a man around, Jewish who do it, the woman should do it. And on the other hand, the RaMaH is saying you really need to take some trouble to find a man to do it, right? V'haitama. That's this reason, right? Dat HaRaMaH. And he says in general, right, that the RaMaH's position is lahachmir, to be, to take a stricter position on things. Okay. And that possibly he is following those poskim, the halachic arbiters or decisors, the ishapsul alamol. He explains in the Gemara and in the development of this idea, there are those who say it's fine, and there are those who say it isn't fine. Okay, right. Okay, so there's no reason to be surprised. Okay, at what the RaMaH is saying. He has something to add, and that's kind of where we left things. Uma shehiksha hashach, right? And in the sense that the Siftei Kohen raised an objection al lashon harama, on what the RaMaH said. V'chein nohagin. In other words, that the RaMaH uses the expression. In other words, here we're now talking about the actual language that the RaMaH uses in the point that he makes. V'chein nohagin lahader achar ish. Right. That was what he said. Right. Quoting him. So here goes, he says, Daha b'davar she'eno matzui lo shayach minhag, right? He says, because I think what he is saying here is that since it isn't common for women to perform circumcisions, right? There's no reason to say that they're to follow the idea of a woman performing circumcisions. In other words, a minhag is a custom as opposed to halacha. That we make these subtle distinctions, and maybe they're subtle, maybe they're not subtle. I guess it depends on your point of view. But minhag means people that a practice in the community, a community practice that is well established, but isn't halacha. It's not a biblical commandment, right? It's a custom. People have various ways of doing things. So near Eli to Adraba, right? That in fact, that just the opposite is true in this case. In other words, the argument is that the reason why you don't have women performing circumcisions is because it isn't common at all. And he says that the Torah T'mimah is saying, is one might argue differently. Ze nikra davar matsui, right? You could actually say, this is to say that it might be considered a common practice, something that is found. V'hainu, and that is to say, the isalka da'atach, that if you were to actually hold the opinion, the ishak sheira limol, right? If in fact people knew that the halacha is that women are fit to perform circumcisions, right? Gam lachat chila In other words, to know. Ab initio, right? We have this idea of lachatchila and diavad. It's a very important principle in Jewish law, meaning to say that ab initio, at the get-go, one might be forbidden to do something, but given circumstances, you might have to do it, and it's acceptable. In other words, again, this is a way of the fact that the more you sort of study something and the more you deconstruct it, you realize that there are circumstances that are created where you can't just make blanket statements, right? That there are circumstances where, in fact, something that ab initio you're not supposed to do, but circumstances may say you need to do it. And the truth is, life is very much like that. That we have general ways in which we go about our lives, but there are times when there are emergencies. Emergencies are definitely times when what we normally would do, we have to chuck out and say we've got to act in emergencies. And for Jewish law to be something that we can take seriously, we have to have these considerations as well. So he's saying, look, it states a woman is kasher to circumcise. And if we have that as saying, not only is a woman, it's okay for a woman to circumcise if you can't find a man, all right? But that lachatchila means that it's okay, period. You want to find a woman, you find a woman. Have her perform the Brit Mila for you. It's basically saying, lachatchila, ab initio, it's fine for a woman to perform a circumcision. V'gam b'makom sheyeshish, and not only that, if the Shulchan Aruch said, even if there is a man who is capable of performing a circumcision, it's fine for the woman to be the one chosen to perform circumcision. Lo yitachen, it's impossible. Shelo hayu nashim yichidot. It's impossible that there wouldn't be individual women melamdot yidehem le'umanot zeh, who wouldn't learn how to perform circumcision. In other words, if we knew ab initio that it's fine for a woman to perform circumcision, there would be women who'd want to do it. There would, in fact, be many more women who would be mohalot, right? Right? But we've never, in fact, seen such a thing. I don't think any of us have basically seen, it may have happened these days, because certainly women are physicians, right? And are capable of doing it, right? Shma mina, and for this reason, ein menichin klal leisha lamo. And for this reason, the RaMaH has that position. That's why he's saying what he's saying, that we need to somehow be able to say that, otherwise, in fact, it would be a minhag. It could become a minhag. And for this reason, women are not going to learn how to become mohalot, bedok, and he's saying QED. Okay? So you can see the way in which it's a beautiful example of halachic argumentation and the way in which we can get into this kind of thing. And it's complex. It is complex. And one has to go over it a number of times in order to understand the logic behind it, right? But on the other hand, it's also beautiful in its own kind of way. Okay. All right. Let's see what we can do here. We have time to go on a little bit more. Okay. Okay, I think we're actually, I want to make sure I'm on to the next particular, yes, okay. So we are looking at Lamed right here. Okay. Hemol, yemol. Look at this. These two words. We are looking at these two words, and man, we're deriving all kinds of things from it, right? Mikan lishtei milot. The fact that it says hemol yemol means that we have actually two acts of circumcision. There are actually two elements to this particular surgery, this procedure. Achat lamila, one for the actual foreskin. V'achat lepri'ah, and the other is the splitting of the membrane under the foreskin. Again, we are talking not just about the concept of circumcision. We're talking about taking that concept and actually applying it in real life. And it turns out that in real life, underneath the foreskin, there is this membrane. And what we're saying is that the reason why the Torah said yemol, is because that also has to take place. In other words, that in a sense is another form of circumcision. And so consequently, we have two circumcisions going on. Of course, the main one to remove the foreskin, but also the one to remove that membrane. You can see, again, this is in the Yerushalmi Masechet Shabbat, chapter 19, second halacha. Let's take a look at Torah T'mimah on this. Usvarale, right, and he's arguing, right, he has the opinion, Dinatna mitzvat pri'ah gam Avraham. This particular opinion in other words, this particular interpretation is assuming, because here the context of this mitzvah is God is telling Abraham, he's saying there's an assumption here that the mitzvah, the commandment to also remove this membrane, was also given to Abraham. V'lo kamanda marba bavli yivamot, right? So remember, we said this was taken from the Yerushalmi, right? There are two Talmuds. There's the Talmud Bavli and there's the Talmud Yerushalmi. There's the Jerusalem Talmud. They are both excellent. We have them. So there's an opinion in the Bavli, in the Babylonian Talmud, Yevamot, in the tractate Yevamot, page 71b, the mitzvat priyah hutchala mimot Yehoshua ben Nun. So there's an opinion. Look at this. I mean, these are scholars, and they have, when in part of scholarship is to take things apart so deeply and to see what distinctions are there, right? In some ways, it's very much like detective work. So there's an opinion that says actually that the mitzvah of the removal of the membrane wasn't given to Abraham. It took all that time until Joshua, because we read about Joshua performing circumcision, because while they were in the wilderness, the children that were born in the wilderness did not perform circumcision there. And so again, look at the amount of knowledge that's involved in understanding these things. Okay. So this opinion in the Yerushalmi doesn't hold like the opinion in the Bavli. So, he says, and see even further ahead of us, the Parshat Shemot, in the Parsha, the Torah portion of Shemot, the Pasuk Chatan Damim Lamulot, where it says, where this is the story, we've had a reference to it already, where Tzipporah, remember, they're on their way back to Egypt, Moses, Tzipporah, and his two sons, and there's this incident, right, at the night lodging, where this angel is going to kill Moses, etc., etc. And Tzipporah realizes it's because he has not performed circumcision on their two sons. And Tzipporah is the one who performs the circumcision, right? And this is what she said: "You are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision, on account regarding the circumcision." And it says mulot, right? Darish lemulot, and the reason is mulot. And if you have a basic knowledge of Hebrew, you know that ot is a feminine ending of plural. It's a plural ending, right? To circumcisions, darish, and for that reason we interpret lemulot shtayim, that there are two. Achat lemila, one for the removal of the foreskin, v'achat lepriyah, and the other the splitting of that membrane. V'oto hadarish, and this same interpreter, lo yalif mikfilat halashon himol, right? So the Bavli man scholar does not derive it from the duplication of the word himol, or of the fact that it says himol. Why? A good question. Why doesn't he accept that? As it sounds like a reasonable interpretation, right? Why not? Mishum, the reason he doesn't, Mishum desfarale, because he is of the opinion, Dibra Torah kilshon bnei Adam. He says that the Torah is simply using natural language. It's the way people talk. Harigilim ledaver belashon kaful. And the reason is because people do often use a duplication. They say something twice. And that's not because they're looking at two separate things. Sometimes we say things, we repeat ourselves, and we mean the same thing, right? Or there's another possibility, Disfarale, that he holds, the kefal lashon ata, that the reason why the language is duplicated, ata comes the drashot acherot shebasamuch. He comes to give other interpretations, right? We do have other interpretations. We had a whole bunch of interpretations of himol yimol, and he says, yeah, he doesn't think it's coming to tell you about priya, that the splitting of the membrane. It's coming, the fact that it's duplicated is because there are other things that you need to interpret from it. Okay, so all right, let's see if we have time for anything else. Okay, well, let's see. Okay. Himol yimol, right? Right. So again, look at this, right? Look at all these. Mikan, from this, lenolad mahul, that if someone is born circumcised, it can happen that a person is born, a male is born without a foreskin, shetzarich lehatif mimenu dam brit, that nevertheless you're supposed to still, this is something that we do today because very often when a person becomes Jewish, they have been circumcised. There was a practice, whether it's as common as it used to be, but it used to be quite common for little boys to be circumcised at birth, okay, if they were not Jewish, and be circumcised on the 8th day. So what do you do? So this applies here, right? As if he's born circumcised, and we have something called Tipat Dam, the taking of a little bit of blood. It's a relatively painless procedure. All you're doing is you take some gauze and you, at the very base of the penis, you take, like, for example, the kind of needle that they use to check for diabetes. Okay, so it's not a big needle or anything like that. It's a tiny little scalplet. Okay, and you just scratch and you'll take some gauze, and if you see a little bit of red, that's it. You're not looking for a drop of blood, literally, you're not. Okay, but nevertheless, it's an act that's considered, to take the place of the actual removal of the foreskin, and one is doing it in that sense. So that's the fact that it says you shall, in other words, it's like looking at this and saying, you shall certainly make sure that you practice this Mila. Right? So let's take a look. Here we are. Is there a question here? David, yes.
Yeah. So I guess in that case, though, have they also done the portion of the membrane below the foreskin? And does that have to happen? Or, if you're not Jewish and you've been circumcised, with that, does that part still remain?
Okay, good question. So my knowledge of medicine is insufficient here. I would tend to think that when the child is circumcised, in that sort of from a clinical point of view, not from a religious point of view, that all of that is removed as well. Okay,
Yeah.
that it actually takes place as part of. It's just simply part of what makes for a successful circumcision. So for sure, it's not. I mean, it is strictly, and I've been at many times when someone, an adult, has decided to become Jewish and they are in fact circumcised, that this has been performed. And yeah, it's simply that it's a very, it's easy for me to say, I suppose, right? But I've even seen it done on a child, okay, and there wasn't even a whimper on the part of the child, which I thought was pretty amazing. So yeah, it's not supposed to be painful. Yeah, no, but to answer your question, generally, as far as I can tell, that there is no membrane left after, whether it happens in the course of performing the clinical circumcision or whether it dries up or what, but generally it's not part of this procedure.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
You bet. No, it's a good question. All right. So so let's see. Okay, here we go. This person who's learning this out, right? This particular learning, that if a person is born circumcised, one is required to take this hatafat damrit, right? Hu lo svirale kimande amar. So he also does not have the opinion like the one who said bidrashot hakodmot, that in those earlier interpretations that we've studied so far, the kfilat halashon, that the reason why there's this duplication of language, bal ramez mila ufriya, He says that's not the reason, right? Or tzitzin, rather we had learned these things. In other words, we just learned about the fact that there needs to be the splitting of the membrane. And earlier on, one of the very first interpretations we learned had to do with the fact that these strands of skin that are part of the removal of the foreskin, they also, if they're not removed, it is not considered a proper Brit Milah. Doesn't learn it from that. Yeah, and why not? Because the Sphirale, he holds the lo nitna mitzvot pri'ala Avraham. He is saying that the mitzvah he holds like those who say that the commandment to split that membrane wasn't given to Abraham, our ancestor, our patriarch. As we mentioned in the earlier note, right? But tzitzin hama'akvin, and regarding, in other words, so regarding the splitting, he says that wasn't given to Abraham, so we don't have to learn it from yimol, right? But tzitzin hama'akvin, and regarding those strands of skin that prevent one from having performed the milah, if they're not removed, it's not a legitimate milah. Sphirala, he says, diyadina misfara. He says you don't have to have an explicit or a suggested interpretation. It makes sense. He's simply saying it's logical that if you're removing the foreskin, you need to remove everything associated with the foreskin. You don't need the Torah to tell you that. Okay. And for this reason, now he's left open with this darish mikvilat alashon. So now he's left with an alternative, right? There is a principle generally when it comes to halacha, when it comes to Jewish law, that while there are possible different interpretations, you are limited to a specific, it depends on the language. True, but generally speaking, it's not like you can just come up with whatever you like because it's Jewish law. When it comes to, our discussion of midrash and things like that, interpretations, yes, we're pretty free to use our creativity and think. But if we're talking about law, we're talking about practice. We're talking about what people are actually going to be doing and feel committed to doing in the performance of divine commandments. And so they're much more there are far stricter rules in terms of how you derive it when you're doing these kinds of deductions. So he doesn't have, in other words, if he had used, the point here is if he had used yimol for one of the other interpretations that we've had so far, he would not be able to learn this particular interpretation either, right? So, okay. So that's why he uses this kvilat alashon, the duplication of liinyan nolad mahol. So he says it's coming to give us laws regarding someone who is born circumcised. Shetzarich le'atif mimenu dam brit, that we have to draw this little bit of blood of the covenant from him. Veritzono lomar, and what he wants to tell us, what he's really trying to say, afopi, that despite the fact, shehu nimo, the fact that this child is in fact circumcised, he was born without a foreskin. Bechol said that nevertheless, in other words, the way we're looking at the language of the Torah, that even though he is already nimo, he is already circumcised, yimol gam kain, he nevertheless still has to have that procedure. But on the other hand, there's no foreskin to remove, right? And since it is impossible to circumcise him any further, right? And for that reason, ach yatif dam brit. So in that case, at least he has to take this little bit of what we're calling the blood of the covenant. And we're going to stop here. I'm going to stop the share here. And you're getting a wonderful, I think, Torah T'mimah is doing a beautiful job of trying to bring Talmudic thinking into, I hope, in a way that we can understand and appreciate. And also, there's a whole sort of, I don't know if I want to call it a discipline, but it's a whole sort of area of discussion and intellectual effort in this kind of way. So we're being brought into that particular world through this kind of discussion that we're having right now. And this is part of the reason why I love Torah T'mimah, because I feel I have some sense of what's going on here. On the other hand, trying to study Gemara without a really good teacher, etc., far more arcane and difficult to understand. So thank God we have people with the kind of knowledge of Rav Baruch Halevi Epstein, who decided to do this particular exercise. Any comments for the record? Okay. All right, I'm going to stop the recording.